I am not a Zoom expert.
Well, welcome to the Old Rollers podcast, Chris Haueter, Old Roller Nation. This is just a truly exciting day for me. I've wanted to get you on the show since the literal day that I started the show. You were one of the people that I wrote down. I was like, must get Chris Haueter. So this is truly exciting.
Well, I'm honored to be on here, and in most ways, I don't understand why anyone would want to hear me talk at all. Ask my wife. No, just kidding.
Yeah, I've been married long enough to understand exactly what you mean by that.
Oh God, you're not going to tell that story again, are you? I've been hearing that same story for 17 years.
Yeah, I can relate. I don't know what the internet likes to say. Something about I feel attacked.
Yeah.
So this particular episode and interview, I spent a lot of time doing some research for, because in the early days of my jiu-jitsu journey. So just a little background on me. I've been doing jiu-jitsu and grappling for just over 5 years. Was awarded a purple belt just before the shutdown happened. So I'm fairly young in my, jiu-jitsu and grappling journey. I'm 40 now, so I'm still in old rollers parlance, kind of young. I've had the good fortune to interview some folks with a lot of years on them that are still getting after it hard. And so it's very exciting to me that this journey is.
I call that young.
Yeah. So and I love that. You could say that to me all day long, and I'll take that. But in the beginnings of that jiu-jitsu and grappling journey, I was lucky enough to have caught on to I believe it was one of the BJJ Globetrotters videos where you were discussing it's not who is best, it's who lasts. And that gave me this window of opportunity, I felt, because I most certainly was not who was best, and was definitely in the running and was in the lead for who was worst, and did not think that there was much opportunity for me to really have much skill at this thing that I really liked. But your talk on that gave me that willingness to just suffer and just stick it out, just to survive long enough that I would outlast all of my betters.
Yeah, that's a stubbornness as a genetic trait, like all genetic quirks and traits, is both good and bad.
Mm-hmm.
And if applied correctly, the long-term view is I won't quit, right?
Yeah.
The short term being a stubborn can mean I won't tap. And that's clearly bad, right?
Yeah, that's have you ever read the book Anti-Fragile by Nassim Taleb?
I have seen it, and I've heard people that would discuss it, but no, I have not.
So Taleb is kind of he's a curmudgeon, and he's very cantankerous. I really don't even think I would call him a good person. I think he's kind of a toad, and I use that term, saying that the book Anti-Fragile was one of the most influential books that I ever read in my life.
Is he's the MMA guy or the a boxer from England?
He is an economist. I believe that his descent is Lebanese.
Okay.
But he is a power lifter, and I do believe that he trains martial arts as well. But he talked about the concept of anti-fragility being that you if there's 3 levels of robustness in systems, be they mechanical systems or organic systems. The first is fragile, meaning like if a teacup falls off the table, it's going to break if it's a hard, floor.
Yeah.
The second is robust, and that would be like a metal teacup. So you could knock it off the table. It might get a dent, but it's not going to be deformed or, like useless or broken. And the last is anti-fragility. And he said that's reserved almost exclusively for organic systems and economical systems. And what anti-fragility is when something is disrupted, be like a teacup knocked off the table, instead of being deformed or just staying the same, it actually gets better. So Jiu-Jitsu has an anti-fragility built into it because you're constantly being disrupted and beaten.
Yes.
And if you can survive and tap, then you actually get more and more robust. You get better. And so incidentally, I found Jiu-Jitsu many years after I had read the book Anti-Fragile, and realized that just like what you said, the stubbornness to not tap, you must let go, because you have to recognize and acknowledge your own sort of fragility in the moment, in the name of becoming less and less fragile and frankly more anti-fragile over time. And that
Yeah.
requires that stubbornness too.
I always say that as a metaphorical phrase, the jiu-jitsu really is the art of adaptation. It's not just adaptation, it's the art and study of adaptation to a hostile environment, with the obvious goal of surviving and or defeating your opponent. And all combat sports are adaptation. But I find that with the complexity of the game of the jiu-jitsu, you get to actually look at the epistemology of adaptation as opposed to just practicing it, right? It's like I used to often say that, like, wrestling, Western wrestling, a collegiate style, freestyle, or even Greco, are very simple games in that your goal is to be on top no matter what. That's the clear goal. And there are various moves and routes that are beautiful and athletic and highly skilled and take lots of practice, but it's a simpler game. Well, boxing, your goal is to not get hit, or to minimize the amount that you get hit, and to maximize the amount that you hit your opponent, and maximize the effectiveness of your strikes and minimize the effectiveness of your opponent's strikes. All true combat arts are an exchange. The illusion is that there's such thing as, which we are all after, the perfect win. An example of boxing is round one, you walk out there, the ref says, are you ready? Are you ready? Get back in your corners. But ding, ding, and you walk out, avoid 3 shots, stick a jab on him, and a knockout cross. That's like the perfect boxing match. And when we see that, it stands out in our human mind so quickly, because we're all after that perfect match. Or in the grappling match, when you walk out, you lock horns, you get the throw, the arm's extended, and you rapidly lock the arm up, and it's a quick tap. But the reality is, those are rare, extremely rare. And although it's a good goal to have that, it's a non-adaptive goal for immediacy. It's great for long term in that way of, like, knowing you're always after to perfect the art. And the art is, how do I control and submit my opponent utilizing the least amount of athletics? and the maximum amount of knowledge, leverage, cunningness, and guile. The sport is, how do I deploy my art within the man-made rules of the game, utilizing all of my art and maximize my athletics. And that's the confusion between art and sport. And they integrate, clearly, they have to, just as our mind integrates with our body. And the street aspect of this is kind of the elusive, you can't ever really nail it down idea that, how do I win in hand-to-hand combat when there are no man-made rules of the game and the loser dies? And that's the idea behind street. And so the way I arrange my whole approach and philosophy, because none of them are an answer in and of themselves for my goals, and it's a pyramid. And I put at the top a street because it's kind of the most ethereal, yet at the same time you could flip the pyramid. It's also the most primal. And then you have the art and the sport. And the art and the sport are how we train this thing with this almost ethereal goal of life or death hand-to-hand combat, because we are animals. And I've found that most combat athletes, not all, have some form or another of ADHD as well, and other little issues where ADHD is basically a hunter's genetic personality in a world of agriculture and order. And to adapt in that world, it's the hunter genes adapt very well in a rapid attention changing world, whereas that world does not exist as well, or that personality trait will not exist as well in the world of recording, engineering, analyzing how the crops will rotate, the patience of waiting for things to grow, all these things.
Zoom meetings.
Zoom meetings. But jiu-jitsu is kind of, you have to become the adult of your ADHD. Whereas martial arts, I found, like boxing, you do as well, but because it's really a jab, cross, a hook, and an uppercut, slip, bob, and weave, and then the art is in the footwork, and the art is in the timing, and the art is in the motion. But jiu-jitsu, because of its complex nature, enables us to become a more cerebral grappler and a more cerebral combat athlete, which also helps us learn how to adult our ADHD more.
So this leads me to one of the questions. I'm really glad that you got to your the street art and sport split and kind of delineation, because that was definitely something that I wanted to talk about. But beyond that, as I said, the different talks that I've seen and interviews that I've seen you do have really helped me to have a frame of reference on how to think about this, as a long-term project. And so I wanted to get from you, what brought you to that sort of, I would say, kind of philosophical picture of this hobby, this occupation, this art, this sport, especially given your origins as one of what we call the Dirty Dozen, in an earlier time of jiu-jitsu where it was a lot more rough and tumble than it is even now. I would
In
think
some
that.
ways, um, in some ways it was. I think again that it's certainly when I was new in this, there was much more of an emphasis on the aspect of the street.
Mhm.
But the art was always emphasized, and I would almost say athletics were as well, but not quite as much. And then the sport kept growing. And in the sport, you realize very quickly how important athletics are to your art. And in some ways, the metaphor I often use and have used for 20, 30 years now is if we are martial artists, it's closer but to dance in the sense that no one can learn overnight Russian beautiful dance techniques. This requires a coach. It requires learning handed down knowledge. It requires stretching. It requires altering your body in order
Mhm.
to practice the art. But gymnastics as well. There's obviously an ideal body type for almost every sport. Clearly, the gymnast ideal is not the same for the NFL or the NBA. And
Mhm.
clearly, those guys would not last in the art competition of gymnastics or jazz dance or ballet, right?
Mhm.
These are so it's important but to understand what is your body type and what direction in this art you want to go. And there's in one of the great things about the jiu-jitsu is there really is no perfect single body type.
Mhm.
I mean, there might be, and this is just an exploration that I've thought about. I used to think about this for years because the period of time in which I was a purple belt and a brown belt, I was taking a lot of ology classes, physiology, anatomy, pathophysiology, biology, zoology, all that stuff. And on the side, one of the things I've always loved is the evolutionary studies. And when you think of the primates, probably if you could train a chimpanzee, if you could do a brain transplant, if I could put my brain in a chimp's body, I guarantee that I would start adapting to the body. I would have all this knowledge of how it works with my human body, and suddenly my feet would literally become hands. And when I used to think of this all the time while I was grappling, I would literally imagine myself being a chimpanzee while I would grapple. And
Going
I
back to
would
marriage, I think my wife is imagine me being a chimp.
certainly. And I think like that's one of the things in the early days that really helped me to come up with my approach to the jiu-jitsu. I used to say all the time as a newer black belt and coach, I used to tell everyone I want you to roll like you are a chimpanzee who thinks he's an anaconda. So you're trying to control and constrict your opponent, wrap up their limbs and swallow them, but you're a chimpanzee. And I found that is kind of a way where one can integrate both movement and stillness, and then grab more space, and then grab more space, and then grab more space, like an anaconda. But patience, but with that ADD movement of the chimp at times, but punctuated, and to feel like your feet are hands and your hands are feet. And that while you are this chimp who is an anaconda, now imagine you are in outer space and there is no gravity. So almost to grapple with the feeling that you could defy gravity. And then at the same time, your opponent is experiencing it. So you want to use the gravity against him, but have it have no effect on you. And that was more my younger style. And then as I aged, and I recall being around your age or a little earlier, which is the age in when one first starts realizing they are no longer young. I remember overhearing in a room, "God, you're fast." And I looked over and it wasn't me they were talking about. And that's, you turn 40. That's that age. And 40s are the age I call of where injury of unknown origin begins.
Mm-hmm.
Where like your 20s, you get hurt and you heal fast and you're back on the mat soon. Your 30s, you get hurt, you start noticing it linger and it takes longer to heal. Your mid to late 30s, you have some nights where you feel like you're 25 and other nights where you feel old. Your 40s starts this weird period where you have what I call injury of unknown origin, where something happens and you don't even remember how you got hurt. It's like, what happened there? How did I just hurt my knee with that just normal movement and all that? And I found myself in pain a lot then. I actually found myself in pain more in my 20s because I was much more immature, much more explosive, much more athletic, much more push myself as far as I can. And I always had an injured back. But now I am in my magical 50s where I no longer even pretend I'm young anymore on the mat because I just can't. When I was your age, I could still, we would have an open mat and all of a sudden a lot of the black belts show up and it was so much fun. It's this thrill, and I would roll with 8 or 9 black belts and it was great while it was happening. Then I would shower and I would eat, and for 24 hours I couldn't even move.
Sorry about that, Chris. My dogs, it's garbage day, and every time the garbage truck goes by, they lose their mind. They're protecting the house from the evil garbage man.
Yes, the evil garbage man, and that's absolutely fine. And of course, in their minds, here comes the threat. I bark and it leaves. Therefore, it worked. Me yapping at it worked.
They're fierce protectors of all that is theirs. These garbage men so far have never raided the house, even once. And I think it is solely due to the fact that these two have let these motherfuckers know that they ain't welcome.
That's right. Every time.
Anyway, continue. Hopefully that has passed. I do apologize. At some point, this podcast will make enough money that I can afford a studio and, you know, the sound stage and all that. But at this moment, it's just me in my kitchen. So
Yeah. Well, yes. So that's kind of my whole approach. And the thing again with jujitsu's adaptation, I constantly change my opinions and approach on it all of the time, just as I constantly change my mind and idea while I'm grappling of how I'm going to grapple, what I'm going to work on, what I'm going to concentrate on. I assess my limitations of the day and of that role and of that interaction within the actual role, right? It's constant assessment. It's almost like you're constantly applying the scientific process at all times. And the irony is, and I will say this is, and this is true of every art and technology, is there's areas where you can apply this philosophy so well in your life, particularly on the mat, and then other areas where you're just a complete novice in white belt, where the answer would be apply the principles of science and or with jiu-jitsu. And it's that blend of the art, the science, which give us the gift of the hunger of learning. And that skepticism, but not naivete, is the balance.
You know, I think along those lines, you know, when we talk about the art, the sport, and the street, one thing that this podcast, and I'm going to use Rob Bernanke's word here because I'm from Kentucky and I'm not allowed to say it without referencing who taught it to me. One thing jiu-jitsu has elucidated to me is the value of the scientific method and the mat as a lab, and the sort of continual projects. To give an example, this is a personal, just kind of something that I've been ruminating on. I think that the blue belt blues almost comes from a failure to adapt to small victories and small experiments. So people get this sense of, I'm a blue belt now, I should be kicking white belts' asses and I should be challenging purple belts. And quite frankly, it doesn't always work out that way. And that's very broad.
Yes.
But if you take a blue belt and you give him or her a project, say getting from white to blue, they got, you know, where they could maybe pass guard pretty okay, but they got 3 decent passes and, you know, pretty much nothing else. If those don't work, then they don't have, you know, they're just kind of stuck. And say, okay, you don't have an over under pass. I would like for you for the next month and a half to just practice over under passing. If you get good at it, great. If not, then we know it's probably not for you. We'll move on to something else. If I see you, you know, I'm your coach, I see you're failing at the over under pass, it doesn't mean anything. So if white belts, you know, start kimuraing you, I expect it, you're practicing something new, right? So that gives permission to lose to people that you think aren't as good as you. It also gives permission to stop thinking about things in terms of like macro skill and just thinking individually. Like this month and a half, I'm working on the over under pass. And then, you know, I'll move on to the next project. And then over the course of the months, all of a sudden you're not a blue belt anymore. You become a purple belt. Through those individual experiments, you develop, they take your mind off the idea of like, I must be blank level of skill to,
yes.
I'm trying to develop a new set of skills.
Yes. A lot of times I have found that new blue belts have it feels like the expectations that they had of a white belt should now be met because I'm a blue belt.
Mm-hmm.
And the expectations that we have are constructs in our minds. And we often see ourselves not as accurately as those who could view us from the outside and have a greater historical perspective of, because we remember what it was like when we were a blue belt and then the transition into a purple belt. I often say that you get to a blue belt literally by osmosis, by just showing up.
Mm-hmm.
You will, even if you fight learning, you are gonna learn enough to where you will suddenly have the knowledge and you're gonna be a blue belt. But you get from blue to the purple belt by actually assessing how you're learning and what's happening. The osmosis no longer works. It's no longer just showing up. Now you have to do something.
Mm-hmm.
Another part of you has to engage besides just showing up.
So would you say that?
Why I hesitate when I say, oh, you want to get your black belt, all you got to do is show up. Because yes, that's true. Because if you're not there, you obviously will never achieve a black belt. But after blue belt, it's really more than just your body showing up. Now your mind has to too. Now you have to start assessing what is this game in both the micro games. What is an arm bar from the guard and how it relates to a sweep and a back take and other stuff. And it starts becoming more complex at that point, which you cannot just learn by osmosis anymore.
Yeah, it almost sounds to me like your description of a purple belt is a grappler who has embraced that scientific method of improvement.
Yes.
In the white to blue, you don't necessarily have to be a scientist. You can just be, a person who shows up, and that's awesome. That's great. In order to get to a level of skill, which I personally think, and obviously I'm a purple belt who's been doing it for 5 years, so my opinion doesn't amount for much. That's why you're on the show, not me. That the purple belt is the first belt where you can look at someone and say, that guy or that girl is kind of a badass. And in order to get to that level, you have to develop, like a badass's level of skill.
Yes, a purple belt is what I call the advanced amateur belt, the adult belt, where the white belt is like your elementary school years. The blue belt is like your high school years. The purple belt is you're now 18. Mm-hmm. You're an adult. You have more responsibility for your own self guidance and learning at that point. No one will just hand it anymore. And the purple belt blues are often, I find, you always hear them, my coach never showed me that. Becomes a blaming thing of why you aren't improving, or the purple belt starts to do CrossFit on the side and weight training and all of this other stuff because they've realized, but the answer is, I don't need to improve my arm bar. I already have a perfect arm bar. I got to get more fit. I got to be faster. I got to be stronger. And these are the blues of the purple belt phase often. And I've said many times, you get to your blue belt on your strengths. You get through it by addressing your weaknesses into your brown belt. You have to humble yourself and then figure out where you need work. And the purple belt, as that advanced amateur 18, 19-year-old, is cocky. But purple belts are cocky. You're halfway there. You feel like if but the game is serving a black belt, you feel like now I'm on the hump. Now it's downhill.
Yeah.
Whereas that's kind of the illusion. It feels like you're there, but really on the mountain, here's the purple belt. You can now see the top. But this last part really is the hardest part. Then when you get to the top of the mountain, that's really the brown belt starts. And then to not earn your black belt, you have to really do stupid shit, have a personality change, major injury, all this dumb shit. So in the view of the purple belt is they're here on the mountain, and because they can see the top, they think they're here, which makes them cocky. And the hard work is right here of the purple belt. That's the hard work. And then the brown belt is that's the polishing game. And then the black belt, we start all over again. Empty it all and learn it as if you are a white belt. And then each subsequent stripe, you go back on the bottom of that mountain and relearn it. And and that just as an overarching lifetime guideline and goal, I have found to be invaluable.
You talked about the idea of humbling yourself and accepting your weaknesses and then working on them. And it almost sounds like when you say, when we get to black belt, we start over, is that you're redoing that same process that took you to purple from blue, which is to find more and more weaknesses and eliminate them.
Yes. Refinement. It's less experimentation, more refinement as a black belt. But there is occasional experimentation. When a new game comes about, a new algorithm, a new pattern, then yes, it's relearning. But mostly it's a refining and a simplification process to make order out of chaos and to apply the chaos to your opponent.
When you say to apply chaos to your opponent, is that something like what I've heard people say, playing a game within a game? You're applying things that you have an understanding of that your opponent may not see. Like, there's a game happening that they're not even aware of.
Yes, it's like this is where the analogy of a chess is good, especially speed chess, because you have to move fast, you have to think fast, and there are mental tools in ways to just create a mental pressure on your opponent to lock up their moves, to lock up their game. But then unlike chess, right, it's like at some point all analogies break down. But there's, let me see if I can bring this back in. There are sometimes, if we were a machine that could store and memorize every single role and game that we have ever had, and then you could read the algorithm of almost every grappler you ever met. Mm-hmm. And here's where experience is gold, is because like I felt lucky in that I did not have a school or a team really as a black belt on, and I quickly became a traveling instructor. And what that enabled me to do is go into other people's laboratories, other people's environments, and for years I took a pride in the fact that if I show up at a school to instruct, I'm hosted, I would make sure that I roll with every one of my peers. Mm-hmm. Peer meaning plus or minus one weight class, plus or minus one belt. So I roll with the blue belts who are my weight and the black belts who are super heavy as well, because it's a peer in belt or a peer in weight class. And now I add a peer in age a bit more, and I will dodge a young, athletic blue belt, but I will definitely roll with all the black belts. And that, over the process of about 30 years, has given me a wealth of almost subconscious reptilian brain. There are very few games that I have not experienced. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Whereas if you're only rolling in your own school, the only time you're not experiencing, or you get your new games from newer students or with competitions. And I'm lucky in that I've gotten to experience a lot of game types, a lot of body types, a lot of the personalities expressed through their games. So that has given me a good wisdom where I can see what kind of game my students or somebody I'm attempting to coach is amusing. And I can often quickly spot with their problem or flaw, even if they're a really good world-class level adult division grappler. I can still spot it as a coach. Mm-hmm. And go, I see why you do this all the time because of the reward, but you're missing, here's the punishment, and here's an easier way.
So that kind of leads to another question, and one that I wouldn't have thought to ask leading, like in my research for this interview. You use the word wisdom, and I think we pretty much commonly assume that wisdom is the result of experience. One thing that the Old Roller Nation loves is stories from the early days of Jiu-Jitsu in America. My audience is primarily American. I got some Aussies out there. Oi, oi.
Hey, Oz.
But if wisdom is the result of experience, and you just talked about being a traveling instructor was almost, you could call it a lab for creating, different novel experiences.
Yes.
And that has provided insight toward your ability as a coach, because you've seen a whole bunch of different games from a whole bunch of different angles, and people playing those games with their inspirations, their body types, and all those different things.
And how cultures and the grappling collective as a whole has made shifts as well.
So give me an example of some of the insights that you've
I'm going
gotten
to
from
say
that.
one last thing,
Sure.
and then I'm going to run
Okay.
because
Okay.
I must run. Wisdom requires experience. You have to have experience in order to have wisdom. But with experience does not necessarily entail wisdom. Wisdom is the ability to reflect on your experience skeptically and continually question your choices. And really, it's finding where you did not have a choice, where you thought you did and you fought it, or when you thought you had no choice and you surrendered and realized you did have a choice. That's wisdom. And I must run. And with that, I'm going to end it.
All right.
So
Well,
it really is. It's not who's good, it's who's left. But you got to figure out how to stay left. And that's the learning curve and wisdom process.
well, Chris, I can't thank you enough for your time and your insight, both on this show and in other forums where I've learned from you. And I really I want you to commit to coming back, because I think there's
I'll
just
come
a lot
back.
more to get from you.
There's
If people
more.
if people want to learn more about you and what you're up to, how could they look you up?
Combatbase.com. Please look it up because of this COVID Zoom world. I'm trying to put out instructionals and things. Go to combatbase.com and subscribe to the Combat Base YouTube channel. If you just look up my name, you might see something else that somebody else has posted. Please just, I hate this, but like and subscribe. And even if you never look at the YouTube channel again, it helps me that you've subscribed. So that's it. I've got to run. Wah, metal.
Thank you so much. We'll put links in the description and on the audio only show notes. And once again, thank you so much. This has been just awesome.
Awesome, brother.
Have a great day.
All right, you too.